Charity. People have quotes might be a little bit harder to understand than some of them have been. I've been trying to pick things that are more intelligible that Ron has written, but this one gets a little murky, I guess, at times. The prayer is probably easier to follow and understand. But I tell you what I think would be good tonight as a way of getting into the topic is to have a very specific kind of encounter in life to be able to work with. So I would invite you at the beginning to think about some interaction with another person, specific kind of action, where you think that some genuine love is going on. And what we'll try to do throughout the evening is to keep going back to that encounter, to that particular event, to draw ideas and to try to get in touch a little bit with what it might have been all about and how we would analyze love. One of the premises of that, of course, is that we only know what love is from the inside of an event. And so I'm going to ask just for a couple minutes of silence at the beginning. And if some people, if you just jot some notes down for yourself, it might be helpful. So what I'm going to ask you to do is not saying, well, I had this loving relationship with so-and-so, but to think of a particular event, an encounter, when it seemed as though love was really at work. So let's take a couple minutes to do this. What I would like to do now suggest some qualities of human love, some of the things that are involved in it, and it might be helpful as we go through it to sort of go back to the experience that you had in mind and see if you find these particular qualities. So the first one has to do with reaching out. It's almost hard to use that phrase. I like that because I suppose of the telephone commercials these days. It's one of the problems in talking about human love is that the language gets so debased. It becomes hard to even use the word love when it's used to describe anything. The word loses its power or its currency. And it seems as though what we're always trying to do is resurrect an authentic notion of it to find a fresh language or new ways of talking about what human love might be all about. But as I try to get to descriptive phrases, it even becomes difficult to find those. For example, the phrase reaching out. The commercials have almost maybe destroyed that for us in being able to talk about love. But I need to stick with it because I think it suggests something really important about what is involved in human love. The notion, I guess, we begin with is that it is very easy to be imprisoned in ourselves, to think we are the center of the world, to be shut up in our own thinking and our own feelings. I think very often depression functions that way for us. I often use the image of depression of spiraling inward and downward. It feels something like that one can't look outward, that one more and more is zeroed in on one's own troubles, and the spiral sort of tightens and one moves more and more inward, and it becomes harder to, in this sense, look out or to reach out. So that's one of the first ways I would see the problem of becoming a better lover, the inability to reach out because we are sort of immersed in our own cares and concerns. We know that, I suppose, is that, the adolescent world. I mean, people who deal with adolescents always think, well, they don't say thank you, or they don't appreciate what we do for them, or they seem to be so insensitive, and they say such weird things, and can be so cutting and all of that. And we think about that as sort of this inability to break out of the prison of self. They're imprisoned in that world. That's the only world they see. They are not able to grasp onto some sort of a larger situation. They're not able to feel that sensitive reaction to other people. And so the problem of life becomes in a way that we can remain fixated at that adolescent level. Never do learn to get out of that kind of imprisonment. So another way of saying the same thing, I suppose, is the feeling that one is on center stage. that one is the object of other people's glances. That's what John Paul Sartre felt about relationships, that people are always looking at him. He was a very little fellow when he was growing up, and he felt inferior, I think, in a way. But that was the way he ended up talking about relationships. People stared at you. The adolescent, again, has that problem of thinking that they're just absorbed. I remember when I was a sophomore in high school, one of my sisters who was teaching me then said, I suppose as a means of getting over shyness or something, was saying, well, what you got to do is remember, if you want to know what other people are thinking about, they're not thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. It's a way of sort of getting off center stage, to remember that maybe one really isn't the center of the universe, that other people got their own worlds, their own associations, their own cares and concerns. So that one can't reach out, really, if one thinks that one is at center stage always. It seems other people are supposed to reach in and come to you or to gravitate around you. So in those ways, I think it's part of the way we experience this imprisonment. Perhaps another way is that what we commonly call the lack of confidence, not feeling good about oneself. That one says, well, I can't reach out because I don't have anything to give out there. There's nothing to communicate to anyone else. So that one gets tied up in feelings of inferiority, that I'm limited, I don't measure up, somehow my self-worth isn't there, low self-esteem, all those things, again, that would keep us from really trying to love other individuals. So in that way, we would see then as love as sort of a triumph over a lot of the natural tendencies we have. A lot of the growing up that we do. Love means that to be able to love means we move to a stage beyond adolescence. We reach towards a greater kind of maturity. That's one of the things that we learn about love is that Abraham Maslow did this excellent analysis in his Psychology of Being, where he talks about a full kind of love, a mature love, and a deficient love. And he's saying, one of the problems with this D or deficient love is that it's always seeking, that it needs feedback all the time, that it's got to be constantly fueled and stoked, or it isn't able to reach out. He talks about moving towards a greater stage of maturity when one is able to do that even when one doesn't get a whole lot of feedback, when there isn't a lot of reciprocation, even when the words aren't there, even when other people are not saying in return, I love you, or acting in that way. So that the more mature stage to be at is to not need a whole lot of that reinforcement. That everybody needs some of that. We call that strokes these days. I guess everyone needs that positive affirmation. But Maslow's study suggested to him that the healthier persons that he interviewed and dealt with were able to keep reaching out even though there was not a whole lot of feedback coming in. So, trying to get at what this notion might mean then positively. It means to overcome all of those things. It means to get off of center stage. It means to get beyond the adolescent phase. It means to get our own needs under enough control so that one could be sensitive to the needs of others. That's one of my key ways of thinking about one of the qualities that's needed to become a better lover. It is that everyone has needs. Everyone has their own desires for those strokes to be fulfilled, to be thought of as being important, to be respected, to have status, to feel loved. Everyone has particular needs in that way. But it seems as though the good lovers, and I do think I say that advisedly because I think people are better at it than others. Seems to be capacities and improvements and maturity in that realm like every other one. It seems as though what they're able to do is to keep those needs in manageable form. It's not like they don't need to hear the words again, I love you, but if they hear them just now and then they're able to keep doing this reaching out. They're able to be generous in their response to others just with a little bit of feedback. Or they're able in particular situations when things feel rocky and rough and maybe one self-esteem isn't the highest, to be able to sort of bracket that for a moment. To set aside those feelings of poor self-esteem so as still to be able to be interested in the other. Still to reach out, the metaphor we're using, even though the self-esteem isn't the highest. So even though that one wouldn't always be just acting out of tremendous confidence, I don't think that's possible. But even when the confidence level shrinks a little and some of the feelings of inferiority are around, that the good lover still rises above that, transcends that. It's more like the feeling, well, that need is there and that limitation I'm feeling, but it won't stop me from listening to the person who needs my ear right now. It won't stop me from taking the food over to the person who needs it. Or it won't stop me from paying someone a compliment who's obviously down in the dumps. That's something, I think, of what one would mean by this reaching out, despite the fact that one's center core here was not as strong as one might think. Let me take up another problem that I think is involved in this reaching out to others and this sort of giving of self, and that is the great fear of losing autonomy. It is that part of the problem, if one reaches out, that one might get engulfed. Or if one lets another one into one's world, one can get hurt. It's the risk that's taken, obviously, when one enters marriage, that one places one's happiness in the hands of another person. That is really a terrific thing to do. It's almost, as one author said, a mad and improbable thing to do, to put one's happiness in the hands of another, to open oneself up so one could be hurt terribly and nearly destroyed. Part of the feeling of that is, therefore, that one loses a sense of independence, that one is not in control of one's own happiness, one's own life anymore, that this is a terribly risky business. This is one of the reasons that many people are not able to reach out. I think, as I've said before, and I guess I really think this is true, that it is, in our culture at least, that particular problem is more of a male problem than a female one. It seems as though it is harder for males in the culture to risk losing that autonomy. I mean, we kid about that in entering marriage. Well, it's all over now. You're going to be chained to this situation. You're not free anymore. You can't go about doing what one wants. It's the sort of the positive image of the swinging bachelor who is free, as kind of the thing we talked about last week, the notion of freedom. And I do think that enters into this whole question of love again. That it seems as though the task, and whether it is male or female, that feeling of, well, I better not go into this wholeheartedly because then I can get hurt. In fact, you can see the more one would risk, the more one would reveal oneself, the more one would tumble head over heels in love, the more one would drop all of the barriers, the more apt one is or to get hurt, the more vulnerable one is to the attacks of the other. So that the call to reach out in love really is one of saying, how do I overcome this fear of losing my autonomy, of having my happiness in my own hands? And again, I think what we would say positively in response to this is that there doesn't seem to be any other way in life to find one's achievements, one's fulfillment, one's self-actualization other than that. I think, though, that it's only a matter that one can only learn that in the degree that one is able to accomplish it. I often advise the young people in going into relationships this way to go at it sort of gradually, to make the risk only partial and limited, and see what sort of reciprocation there is, see what sort of response that one gets to that, and if one's gift of self, whether one reveals one's dark side or goes out of one's way to try to be caring to another, to see if that is treasured or not. Is it reciprocated? Is it respected? Does the other person give back something in that line? And it would seem in that way that one sort of reduces the risk that is involved. It seems to me that that goes in any kind of relationship. The question is always, seems to me, what can the other person stand that way, or what can they contribute? You know, I mean, I don't think that it is part of Christian openness to just lay out one's whole being in front of everybody all the time. That doesn't make sense, because there's all kind of people who will trample on that, who won't respect it, who will not reciprocate in any way. And so it seems like part of prudence to be able to figure that out and to have a sensitivity, to have the antennae out in some degree to test the reaction of others. It seems to me that's where we end up with our good friends. Our good friends are the ones that have been trustworthy in this way. They haven't let us down. They might disappoint us in some ways, but in general, they are in a situation where they return to us in a way what we give to them. They do treasure and respect, as I've said, what we have to give. So that in the risk, I'm not saying here out of this Ronerian approach to love that one just throws it all out all the time. Just gives totally in every situation. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. There seems to be a prudence that goes with charity that says, I test and I gradually move towards greater amounts of this reaching out to another person. Now, you might look at your example that you use to see if there's any reaching out in all of that. The encounter you're supposed to be thinking about. I would guess that if there was love involved, that somehow you're going to see that either you or the other person involved did reach out, break out of the imprisonment of one's own self, get off center stage, be sensitive, have one's own needs somewhat under control, overcome the fear of losing one's autonomy. You might check for all of that. Now, what I want to do with each of these analyses that I am going to offer is to suggest that they always move to a deeper level. It is based on the great Ronerian thesis that the love of neighbor is already the love of God. I need to develop that a little bit here and as a premise for the next step I want to take in this whole thing. And that is that, that's one of Ronner's great important contributions to all of this. He picks up on John's line of thinking in the Gospels and his epistles that if we say we love God and hate our neighbor, we are a liar. Or that there isn't any way to love God except by loving the neighbor. Ronner's of the opinion that each age, each culture and epoch in the history of Christianity has had its main idea that focuses what the Christian message is all about. So one clear example of this would be the Reformation period, with Luther talking about faith alone. Faith was the key idea in the Reformation, and still has been in much of the Protestant tradition. Faith is what saves. Hand one's life over to the Lord. Simple kind of faith that enables one to drink in the life-giving spirit that Jesus offers us. Not works, but faith alone. That became a rallying cry. It was the way Luther understood the whole of the Gospels. It became part of the whole Protestant tradition. It was the way people understood what Christianity is about. You have faith in Jesus. Now, Ronner suggests that in our own time, we probably have a new central notion. one that, at least for many people who are educated and living in the Western world, who have partaken of modern psychology and so on, that really the key notion here is love. And not love of God, first of all, but love of neighbor. It's part in the United States of our empirical side of saying, I want proof for this thing. I want the faith to make a difference. I want it to be tangible somehow. And love of neighbor has that characteristic. I mean, here's a flesh and blood person. Here's someone we're interacting with. You could go back to that message of the early church. Well, why did other people join up? It was because we'll see how they loved one another. There was love in the community. In this period after Easter, we're getting this in the Acts of the Apostles reading. They were of one mind and one spirit. They sold their possessions, brought the money, and shared it in common. All of these notions that these people really loved one another. And it's seeming as though in a world that doesn't buy easy answers, in a world that's jaded and cynical in many ways, that wants proof, that's what people want to see. Does it make a difference? And they won't say, well, do they fold their hands or not? Do they pray or not? Do they go to church or not? People want to see, do they love one another? Does it make a difference? Does it create more harmony? Do they get along? Do they create better community? So Rahner thinks that the really key notion is this love of neighbor. He goes back to Paul's idea that love of neighbor is the whole of the law. That's what it's all about. And that's what we have to latch on to. Well, Rahner says that the truth of the matter is that love of neighbor always means love of God. Always and everywhere, for everybody. Whether they know it or not, whether they deny it or not, when someone reaches out in love to the other, they are loving God. Rahner thinks that's true even of atheists. Even the atheist who says he doesn't believe in God, denies the existence of God, and so on, when they act in a positive way, reach out and love the other, that this is an implicit love of God. This is the way they're earning their salvation. This is why you can say with the Second Vatican Council that even atheists can be saved. They're saved because they follow their conscience, and concretely because they reach out to others in love. So what Rahner says is that there's a mutual interaction between love of God and love of neighbor. To talk about love of God without love of neighbor is to be involved in self-delusion. That one is simply not in touch with reality. One's living in another kind of world. And so it becomes important to link the two together. And it seems like what is primary is the love of neighbor. You see what Rahner thinks is that love is the force that's at work at the world. It's the energy that's around. It is, in the popular saying, what makes the world go round. It's what makes God's world go round. It's what enables us to be in touch with the great God. It's the very essence of what we are. That's that first reading that the notes there. That what love is what we are. It's what we're called to be. As we say in the preface of the wedding mass, that love is our origin, and love is our constant calling, and love is our final fulfillment. It is the center of what it is all about. Okay, so he says those things are just inevitably tied together. They are inextricable. For some people, it's explicit. That is, they say, well, I love my neighbor because that's what God wants me to do. Or when I reach out to my neighbor and try to help in some way, that's my way of praising God, or that's my genuine prayer to God. Some people link it in their mind. Some people say a prayer in the morning like, well, don't let me gossip today. Help me to be sensitive to people. Watch over me so I can be a good example to my children today. No, all of this idea of bringing forth love. Some people make it explicit. It's very clear. But it probably becomes even more, the argument is more sharply drawn if we say that even the atheist is loving God in this way. They don't get up in the morning and say, I do it for the love of God. They don't say a morning offering. They distinguish it out in their mind. And yet love is so built into the cosmos. Love is such a structure of the world that to be involved in loving acts puts one in touch with the source of all the love in the world that we call God. Unity of love and neighbor is one of Rahner's great contributions to contemporary theology. They have picked it up and used it in many kinds of ways. Now, the reason for doing all of that is to go back to our example now of wherever you found this loving relationship and to find what I call there the mystery dimension. That is, if you look at that relationship closely enough, you're going to find there's something beneath the surface going on. There's something vital. There's something that defies rational calculation and logical analysis. It is that mad and improbable thing. It's people risking, even when it doesn't make any sense, when it doesn't seem to pay off. There is, in other words, revealed in any of our acts of love this deeper dimension, this mystery side of life that we end up calling God. That's how it is that we get in touch with God. Sometimes when people are feeling very negative and down on themselves and think they don't do any good and so on, what I like to have them do is to go back to this kind of experience. When they experienced love, when they reached out to somebody else, when they felt the reciprocation of that, and then to pray about it. You know, to make that part of one's prayer, not just say, well, that was nice, but to be able to imagine it, to get into it, and then to relate that to God. And to say, God, thank you for helping me to get beyond my selfishness and to reach out. Thank you for the unique character of this other person that I discovered in this relationship. Thank you for the warm feelings that went on there, or for the trust that sustained the relationship. In other words, what you're trying to do in that kind of exercise is to get in touch with God based on experience. Now, we're always saying love of God. You think, well, what does that mean? I mean, I'm supposed to love God. I mean, what would I do if I was going to love God? I mean, how would you do it? I mean, your niece or something. I mean, you can, I think that's praising God. It gets hard to know exactly how to do that. One of the things, the way we make it concrete, bring it home, is precisely in this love of neighbor. It is what I call uncovering the mystery dimension of life. It seems to me we would enrich our prayer life, our love of God, if we would make that the grist of our prayer, the substance of our prayer, if the prayer would actually grow out of real life encounters with other people. So the prayer isn't just abstract or trying to figure out what I'm going to say to God or what am I going to talk to Him about or how am I going to be in His presence, but the very stuff of the prayer becomes the interactions with the people throughout the day. It may well be something like, forgive me, Lord, for I was insensitive to that person. Or thank you, Lord, you helped me manage my needs. Or I praise you, Lord, because of the uplifting feeling I got in that interaction with another person. Then that prayer has a substance. They're saying it's real. It's much easier to pray out of that experience. Then we begin to know what it means to say that love of neighbor is love of God. It is that. It isn't lead us to it. It isn't preparation for it. It is the love of God. And the prayer would help bring that out. Let me try to say it in one other way now yet, how the mystery is revealed. It seems like that one of the things that love does for us is help us to appreciate the other person, the individuality of the other person, their significance, their dignity, their worth, their unique talents and characteristics, what is special about them. And if we were able to do that again, and we get sort of in the habit of that, it helps us to be able to talk to God as the source or ground of that dignity. God becomes the one who is found in the other person. Think of Mother Teresa. I use it as an example a lot, but it's telling, isn't it, where she says, well, if you can see Jesus in the Eucharist, if you say that, this is working the other way now, then you ought to be able to say you can see Him in the faces of the suffering and of the people who are worse off in life. That is to make that same connection in another way. We can say it theologically that Jesus has identified Himself with those other people. The Word of God is in them. Or you can say Jesus has Spirit is in the other person. You can say the Father loves those others, or the great God has a maternal care for those individuals that we love. All ways of trying to get at the fact that in our just everyday life, that in those situations, we are experiencing what it means to say that God is love. Well, I'm going to stop there now. What I'd invite you to do, I'd like to just a minute of silence to begin with, where people could go back to your experience, check it out in terms of this reaching out, try to get hold of what mystery is there, how God would appear to you in that relationship. And then we'll go on, and then I'm going to, after about a minute of that, then I'd invite you just to talk about that first section with the person next to you. Kind of business. One of the things it seems generally that it's hard to solve that kind of problem sort of abstractly or by anything that you say. What the person needs, of course, is to feel loved, to be respected, and that becomes, the really delicate, hard thing to do. In other words, if you come at that kind of situation and say, well, you're messed up, you shouldn't feel that way, and so on, I mean, it seems to intensify the problem very often. It seems like a much more patient kind of business often, a long-term kind of thing, where one is able to be with another. I think that one of the keys, if one is going to be a helping person for others like that, is the building up of trust. The other person has to believe that you're with them, that you're not going to take advantage of them or secretly put them down. This often takes a great deal of time. And then I think that it's a matter of feeding back the positive to the person when one sees something good. And I think it's very important to do that honestly, because people in that situation will ferret out easily dishonest sort of compliments, I think. I would think it's important to pick up on something positive and to come back to that. And to do it repeatedly. Sometimes I think it's good, when people like that will often resist that, won't they? I mean, if you try to tell them something positive, a grid goes up like this, you can almost feel it. And it seems important to know what to do at that point. One of the things I think one does is to repeat and to wait for another time. It's also possible, it seems to me, to ask a question at that time like, why the resistance? Or why won't you let that come in? Why must you put that grid there? And I think that can lead to a conversation of another sort that tries to get at the root of what the problem is. Why is it they won't let that in? Maybe they won't let it in because they think if they let any of it in, then they would just get hurt more. Maybe they're walking around with guilt feelings that says, I'm not allowed to feel good. I did this horrible thing somewhere along the line, therefore I can't let myself feel loved or let myself do anything good. But I think I'm responding to the question out of sort of a counseling mode. As friends, I think we're often we're limited in what we can do a lot of times. I know I find myself telling people a lot of times, parents, loved ones, friends, you just can't do a lot about it. I'm not sure there's anything particular you can do except be present, except to try to be a positive force and to hold them if they need to cry. But I think it is often very limited what one is able to accomplish. But I would say that in that friendship role, what you need is a lot of patience because you get tired of it after a while. One of the things, while I'm often running on this, that I would be alert to is whether it is somehow a ploy or not. Friedrich Nietzsche, 19th century thinker, analyzed human existence almost entirely in terms of the will to power. He wouldn't get into this lecture tonight. He didn't like Jesus because Jesus was big on love. He thought he was a weak character,
Nietzsche thought that what really makes us tick and what is counts, what you have to build on, is the will to power. And not just gross power, like I'm going to get a lot of money so I can control you or something, or get high status. But Nietzsche was excellent at uncovering the subtleties of the quest for power. And one of the things he points out is that submissive people, or people who appear to be tremendously meek and self-effacing and so on, may be very unconsciously involved in a power struggle, may be very much an attempt to control and manipulate. And I think that one has to be careful of that in the kind of situations, that you're talking about here. In other words, it's very easy for this person to use this as a device to, win your attention. I have extreme examples of this in my counseling experience. I will disguise the account, but I have situations where people have feigned serious illness over a long period of time, to an extreme point of having doctors' names and hospital appointments and all of that, where I found out it was total fabrication. Well, it's an extreme example of this I'm sick, I'm weak, I'm nothing kind of thing, which is used as a device to control. Well, many of those of us who counsel regularly know that sooner or later you come to this kind of situation where the person is going to control you to the extent that they're always going to threaten suicide. And there they are, and it's a question at some point of having to say to oneself, okay, if they commit suicide, I'll be able to live with it. I've been in that situation a number of times myself, where it is just rock bottom. It's like if you can't say that or won't say that, then you're under their total control. 2 a.m., come over to the bar, see me. It's just, I'm going to commit suicide, this is it. You're just lost. Sooner or later, one has to be to the thing of saying, all right, I'm going to commit suicide. This is more what goes on inside your own head. I can live with that. And only then will one be free. Now, I'm using extreme cases to pick up on your point, but I think it speaks to ordinary relationships as well. That is very often, Nietzsche's right, very often there is the power struggle going on, the attempt to manipulate and control, and therefore it seems very often that what is needed is a very firm no to that. You're not going to do that to me. Now, I operate almost instinctively like that, intuitively. I have been fooled very badly on situations. I can remember taking communion to a person who was not ill at all, on this kind of premise. However, somehow we have to be able to know our strengths and weaknesses that way. But one of the things we have to be attentive to is when that self-effacement is really controlling us. And if it isn't, I'm not saying it always is, but that's one thing I would look for. I think a lot of times people will bring me extreme cases like that, and I am immediately on alert because of my experience that, whoa, do you really know that person is in this situation or not? Are they really that bad off? Are they really hurting and all of this? People have a remarkable capacity this way. And I could tell you examples in greater detail that would bring this out. So what I'm saying is that even the extreme cases show us that it's not always the function of love to say you're terrific. Sometimes the function of love is to say, come off it. So, what is this? Now, this doesn't make any sense. What kind of game is this we're playing? I have a general theory about this, that we usually don't serve other people well, our loved ones or friends or people we're trying to help, by allowing them to maneuver us into irrational behavior. That would become my criteria. Am I being maneuvered into irrational behavior? Going to that bar at 2 a.m. does not make sense. No, it just doesn't. Now, there might be cases where it does, but I mean, I have to make that kind of judgment. Am I getting maneuvered into irrational behavior? I mean, that's what people who deal with alcoholics find out. That's what Al-Anon is so terrific. People know so much. You've been through that program. They learn that it's the other person's problem. That they can't be maneuvered and controlled all the time to this strange behavior or to being on tiptoes all day long. It's just you can't live that way. Did you ask the question? What was the question? Next. Yeah. Now, the question is asked, I think, if people are always conscious if they're manipulating or controlling that way, and I think the clear answer to that is often not. What Nietzsche's analysis, Nietzsche really sends you back to self-analysis a lot. I mean, it's so easy to delude ourselves that way in terms of relationships. I mean, I just think that very often there are unconscious things going on. I remember one young woman went through a marvelous charade with all of this, and she finally at one time gave me an 800 number to call in case of emergency. Which was very interesting. I mean, it was a blatant effort to get me to uncover her game. And I remember confronting her with that, and her comment, which finally started the whole process, I think, of therapy, was, yeah, I wanted you to find out. I wanted you to, I gave you all kind of clues. You didn't get it, so I had to give you an 800 number. So I mean, there's a whole lot of subtleties, I think, that go on in all of this. And I think much of a relationship is unconscious. But I get back to something from last week's lecture about freedom. I don't think when we begin to think about this ourselves, we can just get off on a horrible introspection kick, and much of religious life has fostered this, an excessive analysis of my motives in everything, in all times I reach out, it's just a power play, and somehow you get control. I mean, you drive yourself crazy. You can do that on a retreat once a year or something for 45 minutes, but, you don't want to walk around every day trying to probe the depths of one's motivation. I just don't think that that's possible, and we can't unravel it all anyway. I figure that Nietzsche was onto something. I mean, I think there's the will to power is part of life. I don't think there's any doubt about it. It's built in. It's part of the demonic tendency we know. It's what we call original sin. It's one way it's manifest. And so a lot of it is unconscious, and maybe on retreat during that 45 minutes you figure one out, and then you do better relating to people and so on. But I would beware of this excessive introspection, I think.
How does human talk about the role of man? How mankind measure up on scale, reaching out against all the others?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and I think it relates to whatever this idea of Christian love is all about. I would say that the clear call of the gospel is we're supposed to love everybody. That our love as for human beings does not have any particular end. And especially it's not allowed to erect barriers, on nationalistic grounds. Well, we'll feed the poor in the United States, but let those people in Ethiopia starve. Or we'll love the Mexican people, but those Russians, we will hate them. It's possible, in other words, to draw all kind of artificial barriers that way. And it seems vitally important to break those down, to say that we really are called to a global love. And that the advanced people, I believe this, in our world, the avant-garde thinkers and feelers, understand the character of the one world we live in. They have what we call a global sense. Teilhard de Chardin is such a good example of that. We love the whole world because those people over there are our brothers and sisters. We're organically linked with them. The message of this coming Sunday, the vine and the branches. Everybody's a branch of the vine of Christ. So there isn't any limits to that. So that's one part of my answer is that we got to check ourselves and to see who is it I won't reach out to. That's the point of many of the parables of Jesus, isn't it? Of the Good Samaritan. The priest passes by, doesn't help, but it's the foreigner who helps. The hated enemy comes along and is the one who binds up the wounds and takes care. So often Jesus' parables are like that. They break through the ordinary ways of thinking about what love is all about. So that, the global thrust is there, and it challenges any of our narrowness or the barriers or the stereotyping. Maybe for most of us it's not some big, clear barrier like I hate Chinese or something, but it's probably much more stereotypical. That is, there's certain groups of people that we lump together as being somehow having undesirable characteristics, not being worthy of our love. I suspect that ordinary good middle-class people have that kind of real problem, the tendency to stereotype. But there's a counterpoint, as always, to what I was saying there, and that is the danger of making that global love supply for any real concrete, no patience, no ability to be sensitive to his wife or to his teenage son. Well, and that becomes, when you want to talk about love, we got to make sure it doesn't get dreamy, that it doesn't get utopian and unrealistic. I love everybody. The real problem for most of us is figuring out how to get along with this person who bugs us. That's our real problem, usually, or this person that I love, but there's also this strange hate in there. Well, that's too strong, maybe. There's this strange, it's that odd, funny business that a lot of times the people we're closest to or care most about, we can hurt the most. First of all, we know the heavy weaponry that will wound. Often in marriage, that's the image I use. Often in marriage counseling, the first thing I say is, let's shelve the heavy weaponry. Because what people who are close together know how to hurt. They know exactly what it is that the other person is most vulnerable to. That's the risk of love. It's the risk of opening oneself up in a relationship. The other person now knows how to wound. It's easy to bring out the heavy artillery and to use it that way. So it seems as though there's this strange, I'm off on Nietzsche today because I was just doing independent study with a young man and we were talking about Nietzsche over lunch and it's on my mind. But he is a fascinating person, but he understood how the most positive feelings can be side by side with the most negative, right within the person. In other words, sometimes the person you love the most can exasperate you the most. It's odd, and one thinks, I think you look back on your life and think maybe the people you hurt most are the ones you love most. The ones especially you had the most passion about, maybe the ones you hurt most. And that's probably because they disappoint us most, because we expect most from them. And then we're hurt and reach out, or not reach out, but strike out against them. So the other side of this global love is that the real problem is figuring out how to love this obstreperous teenager here, or this insensitive spouse, or this person in the community who rubs me the wrong way. That, I think, or this guy at work whose values are so different from my own. That seems to be the real kind of problem. So it's a dialectic again. Christian call to global love, love everybody. Jesus was so good at this, universal love, but how did it translate, how did it actuate itself in terms of loving this guy by the side of the road who's wounded, even though he's my mortal enemy, I pick him up and take him to the inn. I think it's Jesus put those two things together so marvelously. The stories he told speak more than all the analysis probably ever could. Should we have one more simple question? Yes? No? I feel that we better take a break. Let's take a 5-minute break and then return. Other characteristics there of love, mostly because we might end up with sort of a one-sided notion of what this is we're trying to analyze, or not see the full range of Ronner's sense of what love is all about. So I think I am going to do that. At least talk about two other characteristics of love, and I'm going to do those more briefly, I think, and then allow some time for questions, but sort of the same structure. The second characteristic is that love involves our own self-actualization. That love is the only way we have of becoming our better selves. It's the only opportunity we really have of developing what the Lord has given us. Now, there is a notion around that love is totally disinterested. You know, that it's a notion, biblical notion of agape. That as though what you want to get to is where, you know, you just simply do for the other simply because of the other, simply because of love. Well, my own sense in the human situation is that we don't often get to that point. There's very often this other business in it of the self-interest. And I think that that is not just to be put down. I think there's something legitimate about that. That is self-interest, because of the root statement I'm making about love here is that it is our way of actualizing ourselves. It's the only way that we begin to improve because we're trying to love others. Now, I mean, I think that one of the important things that Ronner tells us is that this happens in ordinary, everyday kind of situations. We're not talking about some great heroic act where we give up our life for another, but we actualize ourselves, enact ourselves, come to our better selves in tiny, simple acts of love throughout the day. So he uses the example of not inflicting one's bad moods on others. He says, you know, that becomes one of the great acts of love as we walk through our day. Don't inflict our moods on others. I once had to closely interact with a fellow who insisted on doing that. If he was in a bad mood, everybody around him had to be in a bad mood. He almost forced people to be in a bad mood. That is where I learned the great idea that one should never allow others' irrational behavior to determine one's own mood. That's where I developed that principle out of that experience, because he constantly tried to control the moods that way. And therefore one had to consciously resist that, rise above that, and not allow it to happen. He used to do it in odd sorts of ways, but it almost becomes a little gamey in a sense. But I was off on the positive side of that what we need to do is, you know, we're not to inflict this mood on others. And what that's doing to us is teaching us how to manage that. And the claim is that being a lover is self-actualizing. It's the way we come to be our better selves. And so we learn to manage that mood. I don't necessarily force that upon you, and therefore maybe I learn to get it under better control. Maybe it can't take me over as much as it might have. Bringing a sense of humor to situations. You know, I often think in human relationships, humor is so crucial, because when things are going badly, there's a tenseness about it. Right? You ever notice that? I mean, in the bad situation, it gets it gets narrowed, it gets engulfing. And humor very often seems to be one of the ways to break out of that. To develop a sense of humor, therefore, is great for personal relationships. Some of you know that I've been working on this pastoral letter on campus ministry, and the chairman of the committee is Bishop Friend. He's sort of an old boy from down south, Shreveport. And every time things got tense on this committee, which was about every 5 minutes, Bishop Friend's great characteristic was to bring in some of this down-home humor. It was sort of corny in many ways, but he just was a master at knowing when to do that and to get the overly serious bishop off his high horse at a point or something. So that, or the overly sensitive writer of the letter, whatever, to get the things rolling and writing. So, I mean, I treasure that kind of thing. It seems like a good quality to develop. One of the ways that we help to create more loving situations. Ronnie gives a whole list of things. Just plain politeness, civility. I often use this example of seeing people in real trouble in the marriage, real hurt, real woundedness. Couldn't manage any tenderness, no affection, couldn't really get much going at all, but the one thing they did was remain civil. They refused, that civility still was the order of the day. Still said hello to one another. And so on. And that, long, big picture, that's what saved the marriage, I think. That's what allowed them to move beyond it, because civility gradually gave way to a bit of thaw, a bit of warmth, and there it was. So civility might be one of the things we bring to this. Talks about punctuality. Just the care for other people's time. So therefore we would try to be punctual. But what we're doing, you see, is by trying to love others, not trying not to be sensitive to others, we are making ourselves perhaps then a more responsible, more punctual, more sensitive person. We are actualizing ourselves. Now it's important that, I said I was going to do this more briefly, am I or not? Maybe. In the self-actualization, of course, is a major notion in the culture. People want that. People think they're going to develop talents and gifts. Very often, it is a one-sided sort of thing. It's like, I'm going to actualize myself by doing my own thing. Forget raising the kids. I'm going to take classes or something. Or, I got to go off and spend 4 weeks in Florida. You'll have to take care of the kids yourself. Whatever it is, those are extreme examples, I suppose, but it is, the idea, it's clear. It's in the air we breathe. If you're going to get actualized, then you really got to look out for number one. Pull your own strings. Take care of yourself. Don't be foolish like they used to be when people were loving and gave of themselves for others. Now, that needs to be fought, and the way I would fight it is to put it into a larger context and say that clearly one of the key ways we actualize ourselves is precisely by being self-forgetful. There's always that dialectic. It's not the only way we do it. A person taking the art course is developing something. That's terrific. But it's not the only way we do it. Part of the way we actualize ourselves, come to be our better self, is precisely by forgetting ourselves, by putting our own needs aside, by thinking of the others. My sense of it is life is a trade-off like this. And there's a realism about it that one just has to come to grips with. If you marry this man, you can't be married to the rest of them. There is a circumscribed business here. You surrender, you give up all kinds of other possibilities in life just by that narrow kind of decision. And yet, that sort of letting go of a whole bunch of possibilities, is precisely a factor in self-growth. Precisely the kind of thing that can tutor one in what life is all about. That's clear. I mean, you can think of any kind of example that where self-forgetfulness and is part of what causes us to grow. In fact, to walk around saying, I'm going to get self-actualized, is probably defeating. You know, it probably just doesn't work. It happens more as a byproduct of getting involved in life, of being interested in what's going on, of trying to do for others, and as we're saying here, reaching out to others in love. Okay, so that's the second characteristic, self-actualization, that we come to ourselves. I don't think I've said that clearly enough. We enact ourselves. Put it this way, other people, do us a great favor by allowing us to love them. You got to have those people around who allow us to love them, because we don't have any other way to learn what life is all about. We don't have any other way to develop ourselves, to get this structure that God has built into us in fine-tuned working order. We need that. We've got to have the other ones. We can't come to ourselves in isolation. We need the people around us who will give us feedback and who will receive what we have to offer. Now this also, if you stop and think about your example, it's interesting, is there any actualization of self that went on? Did I learn anything? Did I get anything out of it? Did I feel good about it? Did some part of me become alive in a new way because of this interaction with another person? Then, again, love of God always implies, love of neighbor always implies love of God. The love in which we actualize ourselves, if we begin to analyze it, look deeper, feel more of what's going on, will again reveal this mystery dimension of life. Well, I think that one of the things that it tells us is that there is a God who's calling us forth. It gives a marvelous positive image of God, not one like who's going to punish you if you do something wrong, but one who's alluring us forward, calling us forth, who's in front of us saying, become your better self. Take a step forward. No matter what your situation, your age, your time, whatever, your culture, there's always possible to have growth. God who wants us to be the best that we can be, who gave us the potential. You get a sense of a God who's with us in the growth process. You get a sense of a source of power or dynamism, kind of a source that will sort of reward the efforts we make. You have to be careful of that because it's not always that clear-cut. But there are cases, it seems to me, and Ronner loves to bring these up. He'll say, did you ever reach out to somebody else, do something for them, they won't thank you, they won't appreciate it, they won't ever even, and you won't even feel good doing it. And he said, if you can think of a time like that, then you were for sure in touch with the Spirit. Then you learned in a new way what God is all about. A God whose ways are mysterious. You might have found a growth that you would have never known apart from that situation. He loves to multiply examples of like that where there is not an apparent feedback or an apparent reward, but suggests that there's a hidden something going on. And I guess I'm calling this a deepened self-actualization. A new way of coming to self. I survived that. They didn't appreciate this beautiful, marvelous thing I did, and it's all right. It's okay. I don't need it. I'll get on with it. Somehow that good, whatever it is collected in me in a way. Isn't one of the great problems people have, good people I'm talking about now, good people who try to love others are always drained. It's always thought that people take advantage of them. You can look around and see the good people that seems to happen so often. Somehow people like that have to know that when they're taken advantage of, when their love isn't reciprocated, that it's all not lost. And again, I'd point there is a self-actualization that's almost hidden that may well be at work that one should be in touch with. Isn't that a problem? I understand good people. I'm sick of this. I'm getting stepped on. People take advantage of me. I don't want to love anymore. Somehow, people have to figure out how to deal with that drain. One of the ways is this hidden self-actualization, the sense that the mystery is in control of our lives in a way that we don't understand. God is with us. Third, real love. So far I've been reaching out to the other, trying to do for the other. Then we're talking my own growth, self-actualization, and now an attempt to put them together and say that genuine love involves mutuality. That there is a proper giving and receiving. I like those words, I think, as a way of, as simple words of saying what ought to go on in the love interaction, a giving and a receiving. Now, of course, what's important about that is that it doesn't become a mathematical equation, like I gave this much, I did the dishes today, you will do them tomorrow. Not that kind of mathematical, so not a law at all. The commandment to love God and love neighbor is not a commandment like any other. That's, I think, in the quote that I gave you. It's got nothing to do with laws, with commandments. A law is something you look at and say you kept it or not. Thou shalt not steal. I went to bed, I haven't stolen. I kept the commandment. The law of love is not like that. Ron always insists the law of love is measureless. It's his great phrase, and I love the quote, is that love is true to itself only if it's prepared to give more tomorrow than today. Love is true to itself only if it's ready to give more tomorrow than today. What it creates is this sense of being called out, of measurelessness, of not mathematical, I give this much, you give that much, and so on. But that one that is generous in the response. That's the Christian sort of love, the mysterious love that Jesus calls upon us to try to look at. What he will insist is that that's always experienced as a gift, that you can't just suck in your gut and do it, that whenever one is able to accomplish a generous love, that somehow there's a feeling that that was empowered, that was a gift. Maybe that's one of those times when one would answer or fall into spontaneous prayer, thank you, Lord. Someone has asked me about, prayer. How do you get more prayer in your life? And so one of the things I was saying is you need signals throughout the day. A lot of people don't have a half hour to pray. But what we got to do is multiply the signals that will make us think of prayer. Things that happen in our lives when we would sort of automatically turn to God. So if someone pays us a compliment, we would automatically say, deep down, thank you, Lord. Instead of, I'm terrific. Thank you, Lord. That could become almost automatic. And I forgot my point. Yeah. That was relating somehow to what I was just saying. We're going to build prayer into this. What is the point? Turn the tape off. No. Somehow I was relating that to experience that we have here. That maybe when we feel this call to go beyond, when it's a call to more, and we feel like we don't want to do it, maybe that's one of our signals to pray. Maybe that when we feel that we did respond and rise to the occasion somehow, that's one of our signals to say, thank you, Lord. I recognize this power came from beyond myself. That was the precise point I was trying to get a hold of. That when we get to that, you see, that would be one of our signals for prayer, and that would help to keep this love somehow in order. In talking about giving and receiving, it strikes me that the problem for many people is receiving. The great emphasis in Christian preaching and so on is to say you got to learn how to give, to get out of this prison, reach out, and so on. But I think there's a lot of good people who do that easily, but are not able to let it come back to them, not able to receive it. I turn around what I said before. We do people a great favor by receiving their love, because that's the only way they can actualize themselves, the only way they can come to maturity, the only way they can respond to the call of God is through that love. So we do them a favor by being able to receive, to not put up the walls and the barriers, but to let it come in, to drink it in. A simple test of this, I think, very often is how one receives compliments. Whether one is able to take those or not. Or the harder test is, I suppose, when we are dependent in times of sickness, whether we're able to allow others to do for us. It would seem that would probably be a good habit to cultivate as we would move into old age, because probably we're going to have to receive like that to be able to cultivate the habit of being able to receive love from others. Because maybe that's why some people can't do it when they get old and they are incapacitated or need the help of others. Maybe it's because they never practiced it. They were great givers, great active lovers, but not very receptive lovers throughout their lives. So maybe that becomes a good thing to learn. I often wonder why some people age gracefully and others don't. And it just at this very minute strikes me that that's a possibility, isn't it? That one doesn't practice for old age, for dependency, because one's always the giver and not the receiver. Doesn't learn how to let that come in. Again, I suppose if we would look at this in terms of the mystery dimension, love of neighbor is always love of God. The mutuality in relationships will again reveal a God who's the bonding of that. And we like to talk about that in marriages, not two people, but a triangle, a God and the other two people. A source and strength for that love. Surely one of our great experiences of God is when we find a surprising ability to reach out to others. Certainly one of our strongest positive emotional experiences is when we receive love and feel it from another. Now that's back to the kind of things that Carolyn said before, that ability to drink it in. I mean, I so often think that those of us who grew up in good families and learned that initial stage of trust that Eric Erickson talks about, that life is trustworthy because our parents were trustworthy, that those of us who came to know that have a tremendous depth. Now, people who didn't have that, are in a struggle, and they got their own thing and their own good way that God deals with them. But if you look at your own experience and you had that essential input, geez, it seems like that's the great gift. That says, geez, I better share this with somebody. I better help somebody else out if I've been given this. If I have a degree of that love built up inside of me, then that's when one ought to be willing to share it with somebody else. Well, the third characteristic of love that I wanted to use and to try to bring that together was mutuality. So at its best, therefore, the lover has developed the capacity and received the gift to reach out. In doing so, they come to a greater maturity. And in the interaction, one finds some of one's best experiences in life. Now, as I started out the lecture, the problem, of course, is it doesn't go that neatly. Now, that's an ideal picture of love. It's not the romantic notion of love that you find in the movies or in the magazines, which mess our culture up enough to begin with. No, that's what somebody said they can deal with the questions here. Well, what does the world mean by love? Love in the world means the romantic kind of love, a love where the heart soars all the time. And that, of course, messes us up so much because people don't then understand that love, in the words of Dostoevsky and that Dorothy Day loved so much, that love is a harsh and dreadful thing. Love is a harsh and dreadful thing. Right? Love is awesome. Love requires the sweaty daily business of deciding to not inflict our moods on somebody else, or of deciding that we're going to try to be good for others, deciding that we want the best for the beloved, of fighting our tendency to try to build up an ideal image of this other person and make them conform to it. One of the ways we exert influence on others. Someone said to me at the break that isn't it true that in a lot of times in our reaching out, it really is a matter of grasping. The reaching out becomes grasping. holding on to, holding down. I suppose parents know that most clearly when they have to let go of their children. They're becoming older, gradually educate them to freedom. They leave the home and so on to be able to let go of that. But we learn that in so many ways in life, I suppose. But the danger, again, the reality of life is that we know the grasping. We know the domination. We know the problems of getting tied up in our own autonomy. That's the reality. Love is always disappointing in a way. There was two ideas there I didn't distinguish. One is there's a cultural notion of love that messes us up. It's romantic, beautiful, everything's great, get married, live happily ever after, terrific. Well, everyone knows that that isn't the way life really is. However, that notion, that image, still infects the culture. Just sit in my chair and listen to people who are going to come in and get married, and you'll know that, while it's obviously not like that, they don't know that. They lived in families where their parents fought. They lived in families where things didn't go well. Many of them have come from broken homes. And yet they sit there with this massive cultural notion that in their case, it'll all be different and flow automatically and smoothly. So that's one way an ideal notion of love messes us up. But what I want to say also is the lecture I gave tonight could mess us up too. That is, that even though it's a sharper notion of what love is, again, I think, of self-actualization, self-fulfillment, reaching out, mutuality, and all that's all beautiful, but that, again, could just become another ideal that one expects to happen in actual life just like that. And I would say that what is needed, therefore, is a realization of the existential reality, of the way it really is, of the disappointments that come in love, our own limitations as lovers. Isn't that part of what one has to get in a hold of? I only have so much capacity. I think it's like IQ and RQ, religious quotient. There's an LQ, a love quotient. I believe that people have limited capacity based on training, background, 100 factors that come into play. Have a limited ability. You can see it in marriages like that. Just say, one person just gives more. That's all there is to it. It doesn't mean the other one doesn't love the spouse. They just can't pull it off. They just can't get it together. They don't have the resources, the strength, their needs are too big. But they love, and they do it to a degree. 4 on a scale of 10, their spouse is doing 7, but there's different LQs. But I'm saying part of the reality in talking about love is to face the limitation. Doesn't mean we can't try to become better lovers, improve, listen to these characteristics, try to put them into practice and so on, but limitations. And there's limitations in the other ones too. There's a great line, the others will always disappoint us, always. The other person will not measure up at some point when we want them and feel we need them. That's built into this situation as well. So as well as love, we know selfishness. As well as reaching out, we know the imprisonment of our own needs. That has to be factored into the whole analysis. But, and the last point now, that's not all that bad either. That has a mystery dimension to it as well. That shows us that love of neighbor is love of God also, because it raises the question, are we doomed to frustration forever? It raises the question, is there a love that's finally satisfying? It raises the question, will what I really want, a love reciprocated totally, will that ever happen or not? And that's the question of God. Is there meaning to the drive for love, or is it to be eternally frustrated? So even our limitations in love, even our disappointments, our inabilities, all of that, again, puts us in touch with the love of God. And of course, what our Christian faith says is that, yes, there's an affirmative answer to that. There's a God who is love, who is absolute love, who's the source of all the love in the world. You see what that would mean concretely? Instead of crying all day because someone has disappointed us, it again could lead us to prayer. It could again lead us to falling into the arms of the great God. In other words, I think we got a choice when we are frustrated in that. We feel sorry for ourselves, pine about it, Why doesn't you have an RQ or LQ of 8 instead of 2.5? I mean, you can do that, but there's another way to allow that to seep into or to fall into prayer and into the hands of the great God. Structure, what I had to say was that each of the characteristics shows the unity of the love of neighbor and the love of God, and even the limitations do the same. I think that I will finally stop and see if we have any questions, comments, fill-in, examples. Because it's warmer, maybe people don't need to go home. Well, you're cold anyway. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think we could use those words of the self-acceptance. You know, to go back to Ronner's thought, and I've repeated often, that the key to the whole of the spiritual life is self-acceptance. You know, I mean, in other words, you could analyze just all parts of it in every way from that viewpoint. But let me just try it out a bit. You know, the kind of self-acceptance would mean, hey, I need others. Self-acceptance means I'm dependent on a power greater than myself, or I do need others. I may not want to need others, but I do need them. Self-acceptance means I've only got certain limited capacities for love. So, I mean, I think I could go through all of the characteristics that we talked about and do it in that way. But what you won't arrive at, and what I think is important, is precisely the dialectic. The one phrase, self-acceptance, is not going to give you the feel that I think is necessary for understanding what this is about. That is, there is an interplay between self-forgetfulness and self-actualization. The two interact. They mutually enrich one another. So that, I mean, just very concretely, the more you are actualized, the more you're in touch with yourself, the more you have what Maslow calls your more subtle needs in control and so on, the more self-forgetful you can be. You know, I mean, if you feel confident about yourself, you don't have to go around telling everybody how great you are. You can forget that and listen to someone else tell you how great they are. You know, I mean, you can, and the other way, so I mean, once you build that up, that has an interplay with the self-forgetfulness. On the other hand, the self-forgetfulness, when we're able to, that's one of the ways we're able to reach out. We get off center stage. We get out of the spotlight. We don't think like Sartre thought, that everyone's watching me all the time, that I'm that important. Like my sophomore teacher told me, you know, the other people are thinking about themselves. Get off center stage. Don't have to be there. And so the self-forgetfulness will precisely enable you to develop yourself. It will enable you to get on with it. What would I say? If a teacher was really, you know, just too caught up with themselves, they'd be always worried about image. So I guess a good way to think of it, what's wrong with our culture? Image. Politicians have to think of image all the time. Everyone's got to think of image. And when you think of image all the time, you don't forget yourself, but you don't do anything either. You don't accomplish. You don't actualize yourself. It seems like when the self gets out of the way, that is when one is able to come to something richer and fuller. It's like Thomas Merton, who is on my mind since I'm doing a little retreat on Thomas Merton before long. Merton says, you know, the dialectic is between the false self and the true self. As long as the false self is all we know, the self that the world sees, and the mask that we must wear in order to survive in our society and get along with people, as long as that's all, we never get to the true self. So if we're able to peel away some of that then we are able to get in touch with the true self, which is liberation, which is to feel good, which is to say, hey, I got my own thoughts. I can trust my own experience. I'm me. You know, sort of take it or leave it. That's it. It's what you got. You know, this is it. But there's a healthy feeling about that. One doesn't have to be on tiptoes. Doesn't have to somehow, be making an impression. Always, I'm trying to say that I think that if you just talk self-acceptance, you'd miss the interaction between those two. I think it's important to keep the dialectics together. But self-acceptance is involved in all of it, at least from a Ronarian perspective. Is it just a follow-up point, or is that... One more, or should we go home right now? Last one. Yeah. That's a good point. I think you could, it'd be interesting to make both sides of the point, whether the real problem is the failure to risk, or whether the real problem is that people are overboard in giving of self, opening of self. I'm sure my comments grow out of dealing with a lot of young people who go too fast with the openness. They're in bed before they figure out whether they are treasured or not. Simple as that. And so, I'm sure my comments grow out of a lot of dealing with that kind of problem. And I suppose the comments grow out of a certain avant-garde segment of the population that's into candidness as the new all-encompassing virtue. Frankness, you lay it all out. You expose the whole thing. That's it. You're in a group for the first time, and you just tell them everything about your life. There's an avant-garde element in the culture that espouses that. I'm sure that's what I was reacting against. On the other hand, if you look at average marriages and so on, it seems to me that the problem is the lack of openness, or the inability. I often characterize it in terms of the frozen areas. So even in marriage, one would expect the most intimate kind of relationship where there are areas that are simply off limits to the spouse, probably because the spouse has not dealt well with them in the past. It's the husband who stops for a beer and tells his wife, and she blows a gasket, and from ever on, every time he stops for a beer, he never says so. That's now off limits. We just don't talk about it. It's a frozen area in the relationship. And it's a trite example, I suppose. I think that in people relating intimately could find that. I just can't talk about this to my husband. She just can't stand to have me bring this up. And that's in part of the game. Everyone knows it, and that's it. I think that impedes growth in the marriage. So I'm thinking that your comment, I'm giving a lot of credence to what you said, that I think very often in our culture, and I do think it's more of a male problem than a female problem again, that males are extremely reticent in this openness, in this giving. And I think that you can see it over and over in relationships where it never gets to any greater depth. It always remains on the surface. And the other partner to the relationship is saying, but I want more. I want an in-depth relationship. I want to talk about feelings. I want to be able to share my soul. I want to pray together. And that was me. A young couple came from quite a distance to see me. They did a little marriage counseling. And it all centered around the praying together. You hear so much about other kind of projects, but that was the nub. And again, broke down male, female. She was open. She wanted to pray together, and he didn't feel comfortable saying this out loud, talking to God in front of his wife. You know, it was just too much to imagine. Fortunately, we found a compromise, and this we now have this problem solved. But I think that you're right. I mean, in the culture as a whole, we lived in a Puritan culture, lived in a culture that celebrated reticence, that where there wasn't a lot of deep sharing very often in families, and it became sort of the order of the day. And I think there's a whole lot of that still going on, and where there isn't the risk and isn't the openness. And I think, in fact, after you say it that way, it's probably the more prevalent problem. And I think the only places I don't see that are among the young people and among the sort of avant-garde people who are into pop psychology and encounter groups and etc. But that's, I think, good corrective to what I said before. I think it would be good to, if someone has a burning question that will irk them the rest of the night. Anyone got one like that or a comment? If not, I think we will call it a night, and I would like to invite you to come again next week, and we will talk about searching for a liturgical piety. We will hope to see you then.